Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Parenting Teens podcast. Today, we're going to talk about burnout, but more specifically, we're going to talk about burnout from an aspect of parenting and from a point of teens and young adults in the stresses they're going through education, through transforming into adult life, and through just being overwhelmed with all the instructions that parents and teachers throw at them. So we're going to look at this from both aspects today and how you can work on recognizing burnout, learning what it is, recognizing it in yourself and in your child, and learning some strategies to help both of you or all of you through burnout into recovery, and ultimately to be able to manage your energy load so that you can actually prevent burnout from happening. So let's get started on this. And so first of all, what is burnout? Now, I like to think of this in three phases. We have emotional energy, we have mental energy, and we have physical energy. Now, there are other aspects as well that come into that, but that comes under the physical with things like nutrition and health and sleep, and it all breaks down. But there's starting with mental and emotional. Mental energy is the thinking that we do, the processes that we follow every single day. Getting up, following through that morning routine, get washed, brush your teeth, have your breakfast, get ready to go to school or work. And it's how that uses up our mental energy resources. Then there's all the tasks and the learning that either you do through the day, whether it's shopping, cleaning, washing, or whether you are actually going to work, you're a working, busy professional parent. And then there's also what the teenager goes through with their learning at school. All the mental aspects of following their timetable, getting from this class to that class, remembering where to be, having to deal with all of the social aspects of school, and then the lessons themselves. Get back home, and then it's back into the family routines of maybe there's some chores to do, maybe they've got homework to do. That's pretty much a given, the homework. And it's just about how that drains us mentally every single day. So most days, people are able to manage their mental energy reserves and balance that out. It's like rationing it. I know I have this capacity for dealing with mental issues throughout the day, right? And every day, our schedule should fit somewhere just inside that capacity. So by the end of the day, we've got a little bit spare for some fun, for some relaxation, socializing with a family or friends, watching some television, whatever you need to do, having a nice warm bath, whatever. But those mental processes throughout the day ideally need to be a little bit less than the capacity we have. Now, every individual person's capacity for mental processing is slightly different. I have ADHD, so mine is actually slightly smaller. And therefore, it's easier for me to burn out because my mental processes can out-resource the capacity I have. So I have to ration very carefully the mental resources I have. And for other people, they have a massive mental energy resource and they go out on big missions, they run big companies, they do lots of networking. And then you get the students that go all the way through to high-level education and university, and they just suck all the information up. And they manage to go out and learn at university, they run a job, they socialize with the family, they have their own socialize outside of that. They go on things like these camp weekends where they do all these challenges and win awards. And these are the people with tremendous amount of mental capacity. Not everybody can achieve that level of activity mentally, let alone physically. So the first thing to do is recognizing the difference between having that capacity and actually having a schedule that fits within your capacity so that you don't burn out and exceed what you're capable of achieving mentally. Now, the second one is emotionally. Whatever we are doing in life has an emotional impact on us. Either we feel happy doing it or we feel anxious about it. Some things happen that make us angry. And when you get to a point and you are overwhelmed, and especially when your mental capacity is going outside of your your workload is going outside of your mental capacity, we start to drain mentally and emotionally together. And it can lead to burnout and ultimately to depression if it's not recognized, not caught, and not dealt with strategies for reversing it. So, for example, parenting side, you get up in the morning and you're dealing mentally with the process of getting all the children up ready for school, partners off to work, yourself off to work, and there's all the mental processes. But then there's everybody yelling, I want this, I can't find that, I don't want to go to school today, oh, I'm fed up with work, I need a new job. And when you've got all of that narrative and social interaction going on in a negative way, it then starts to drain our emotional capacity as well. So if we now think of emotional with an equal capacity to the mental capacity, but again, everybody has a different level of emotional capacity to mental. So if you've got somebody who is highly intelligent with a massive mental capacity, but they're already overloaded and whelmed with something that's been going on in life, like moving house, losing a family member, changing jobs, health, their actual physical health being an issue, and a number of other things, maybe lots of money, right? These all emotionally impact us. And then the little bit of emotional capacity that left is smaller. And then little things that come along can easily trigger us when that gets too small. And we start to actually protect that capacity that's left. And it's the same with the mental capacity. When people get angry, agitated, frustrated, irritable, bitchy, right, and actually start to get uncomfortable in the society around them, or very tetchy towards the people that are close to them, it's a sign that one of those two capacities has been reduced. And that's one of the signs, but we'll come back to the signs in a bit. And so when we look at emotional capacity in that same way, in that it has been drained, again, it becomes difficult to function in daily life. And the same is, we all have that ability to do a certain amount of tasks mentally, but once we exceed that limit, it becomes very difficult and we get very drained. Physically, this is probably the easiest one to understand, and I probably should have begun with this, but you know what? You're going to get this so much easier now anyway. It's like running, physically moving. We all have a limited amount of energy every day where we can move, walk, run, whatever we're doing. If you're working in like factories or doing a physical job, you become physically drained, tired, exhausted. And then we have food that we put in, which gives you energy. But if you're using more energy than you are putting in, and there's a reason I've come to this one last, it comes out now. When you are putting more food in your body than is coming out, we become, our physical capacity becomes more. We grow, we put on weight. But when our physical capacity outward is more than coming in, we lose weight. But it also affects our physical energy, and the mental and emotional are just the same. So we've looked at how that can drain, but what about putting capacity back in? And actually, like a diet, putting food back in when we are feeling drained and we need to stop, we need to rest, we need to eat. Sometimes we need to hydrate. So physically, this is a great way. Let's go backwards through the process from here. So somebody who's perhaps just run a marathon is going to need to keep hydrating, and then they're going to need to re-energize themselves with food at the right time of the process at the end of the marathon. And every day, everybody's food, sugar, glucose, blood levels spike up and down. And when your blood glucose drops, that also affects our mood, our emotions. So your emotions will come into play on all three of those: physical, mental, and emotional. We'll hit a point where we are drained and our emotions change, right? And this is one of my key sayings is, mastering life is all about mastering change. because when our circumstances change, our emotions changed. But what was it that changed? And that's where it helps to start understanding this. It's easy to say if we're dehydrated, that was the change that makes us headachy and then irritable. But by drinking water, we rehydrate, the headache goes away, the irritability goes away. And that's how we master a simple change like staying hydrated. So if you're feeling irritable, that's maybe one of the first things to look at. Am I thirsty? Am I feeling dehydrated? And it's a good one to teach teenagers in terms of this capacity, is what's going out and going in, is understanding that balance and how it can affect emotions, because emotions are important. And if they get to a point where they're dehydrated and getting irritable and emotional, but they've not learned to become aware of that need for drink, for fluid, then the emotions can actually become an issue in themselves. Oh, why did I get so fed up and so angry and stressed when that happened? And instead of associating it with the hydration, they could be errantly associating that mood with something that actually wasn't a problem at all. And then next time that thing happens, they might go, oh, that's happening, that's going to be a problem again. And they can subconsciously build up the wrong messages about what makes them happy, what makes them angry, what makes them sad, and so on, because they've associated that dehydration with an activity that happened at the same time. And we need to get them out of that and to recognize that actually sometimes the power to change out of that emotion is within simply going and getting a drink of water or something to rehydrate with. The next one is the food. Obviously, same again, when our blood sugar levels go up and down, is recognizing, and we all know about the diva mode when somebody's hungry, or hangry as it's now called. And believe me, I have a granddaughter who is absolutely perfect at doing this. You do not want to meet her when she's hangry. But oh my God, the minute she's eaten and her blood sugar goes up, she is the happiest, the loveliest, the most friendly, smiliest, giggliest grandchildren of all of the ones I have. But when she's hangry, wow, she's the one you least want to be around. She goes for it. And so it's interesting watching when she starts to change moods. Was it because something around her happened? Because she will blame it on that. Last week, she had a massive meltdown over trying to put a car seatbelt on. But the car seatbelt wasn't the issue. It was actually being hungry. However, the next time she gets in the car, she's trying to associate that anger with the seatbelt being difficult to put on. So we're trying to educate her that actually the seatbelt is not the problem. Her thinking about why she got angry the time before, or the time before, whatever, that is why she seems to think the seatbelt is a problem. And although she's not a teenager yet, you imagine if we don't correct that behavior in her now, and I don't support her mum and support her, what is she going to be like by the time she's a teenager? Because I can guarantee you it will be unbearable. So it's good to even start before teens for some of this, to help them understand the impact of food and hydration on their emotions, and actually highlighting that those problems were the wrong problem to be looking at. It was difficult because she was hungry and angry, right? She wasn't hungry and angry because that was difficult. And we need to teach them to think about it the right way around. So that's a little bit about hungry and angry. And also as parents, recognizing, right? Recognizing when you are hungry, dehydrated, and feeling angry or irritable. Because it's so easy as parents to go into that mood and actually have a go at teenagers, young adults, and children, and actually let that anger out on them when they've asked a simple question that they were stuck with something, and you go, rah, rah, rah. And then all of a sudden, what message is that giving them about your behavior, or your, actually, let me flip that around. Instead of, like my granddaughter, thinking that the seatbelt was difficult because she got angry, rather than thinking she was angry because she's hungry, if your teenager has a problem, and they come to you to ask for help, and then you have to go at them because you're hungry or dehydrated, right? What they could feel is, next time I have a problem, it's not safe to go and ask mum or dad or the teacher, right? Teachers as well, especially in the late morning up to lunchtime and late afternoon when you're tired. And that's the other one. When we're going back to the physical energy and the mental energy, when you put physical and mental energy together, by the end of the day, tiredness can do this just as much as hunger and dehydration. And so these are all like mini forms of burnout on a day-to-day basis. But when we allow these to continue day after day after day, and they go on for weeks and months, we can eventually get to a point where the burnout becomes a serious medical issue, or certainly a mental health issue, depending on how it affects you. Some people find their health will absolutely plummet, suddenly and unexpectedly, and others will find themselves sink into a very deep depression. I know, I have been there. And I did a lot of work on myself to prevent burnout for many, many years. However, life did throw curveballs that made it very difficult for me to overcome everything, where I was working through that overwhelm and the stress and the anxiety and the burnout and barely coming out of it before the next curveball came. And I actually had such a horrendous sequence of curveballs that went on for nearly 10 years, actually probably more than that. I'd had a child who was suicidally depressed, or at the very least in deep, dark pits of depression that took hours to talk him out of. And when he wasn't in the pits of depression, he was having outbursts and just generally frustrated and grumpy and just all of that tension and anger in his voice. And after 12 years of dealing with that, to come through that, only for me to then get burnout through workload and then end up with the next thing was I had a grandchild who was diagnosed type 1 diabetes. So there was a lot of emotional and mental and physical support going on in the family there, helping his parents. And then I went through divorce, having to sell my house. I lost 8 jobs in 3 years. Then we ended up in lockdown just as I finally found somewhere to live. Again, first time in my life living on my own, and we got put straight in lockdown. And then I wrote my book, and I worked so hard on writing my book that, again, I burnt myself out. On top of all of that, I'd managed to stay afloat through all of that, despite a lot of emotional moments, very emotional moments during the breakup and house sale and sort of moving out. But it was after I'd written the book, and then that lockdown went on for so long that by the end of it, I crashed. And it took me a year and a half to start coming out of it. Nobody really has a year and a half to take off sick. But it hit me hard because I'd had so many challenges. And that was just some of them, without grief in the family and other things. It was a lot. And it finally caught up with me. And I had followed the strategies, but it was a very unfortunate set of sequences. But for most people, we are talking burnout on a level of a job is getting overwhelming. And it's about managing that. So, for example, I was working in an office at the same time as supporting my son with his suicidal depression and trying to deal with problems in my marriage. But in work, I knew I was constantly picking off deadlines in this overload of work, but I wasn't quite sure how overloaded with work I was. And so one of my colleagues gave me a spreadsheet that he'd worked out to see if he was overworked. And I filled this out, and he'd done all this. He was very technical. He was a data analyst, and he'd come up with this really technical spreadsheet where you could put in every task that you do every day, every week, every month, every year. And you wrote how long it took to do each job. So if I had to do the post and it took 10, 15 minutes a day, I put that in. And then it calculated how much time over a year that took me to do the post. Cleaning the coffee machines, supporting meetings, like I had weekly meetings with my manager and monthly town hall meetings. And then I was managing facilities. So some of those jobs might have been a particular inspection That meant I had to get work assessments, risk assessments sorted, and then do the toolbox talks and follow up and pay the invoices. Adding all of that time up for a year inspection, had to add all of that in as well. And so by the time I'd put my entire workload in, he said to me, if you're anything over 80%, remember we talked about capacity, and you need to be just inside that capacity for some room for flexibility. He said, if you're over 80% and you haven't got that room for flexibility, he said, you're overworked. Well, I had a shock. I had an absolute shock when I'd filled all of mine in, and then I looked at my final capacity. My workload was 190% of my time capacity for doing it. My actual hours of being available at work without adding on overtime, because it was flexibility hours, we weren't actually paid overtime. If you worked an hour late this day, you took it off another, and so on. And so the idea was that my work should fit within my 37.5 hours a week, but my workload was 190% of that. No wonder I was feeling burnt out at work. As well as, we just had 3 grandchildren in the family by this point, or 2 on the way. And then it was just shortly after that, within a year of that, I had a grandchild being diagnosed type 1 diabetes, my marriage falling apart. And so, I was burnt out at work, and then add on all the rest. And I kept using all the strategies I could to come and regenerate. I knew how to balance life, and I stayed afloat through all of that. But it wasn't until after the lockdowns, and I had then started to get physical health issues on top of that were escalating, that I finally had that crash. It became too much. And at that point, it was out of my control to prevent it in the literal sense, because it was so sudden and it had gone too far. But I'd managed to hold it off for 10 years before it got there. However, it was still my responsibility to come through it. And that did require me acknowledging it and getting support and using processes to come back through that healing process. And part of that is why I write all the mindfulness books, because I've seen people go through the same kind of process in burnout and are still working their way out of that 5-6 years later, and some many years later. They don't recover if they haven't got the right strategies. But I did, and I was able to work my way back out of that burnout. But for most of us, we want to prevent it getting there in the first place. And parenting is one of the most stressful things there is going, when you are terrified every single day for the safety of your child, particularly if you have a teenager or young adult who is into drinking, drugs, promiscuous sexual activities, whether they're self-harming, feeling suicidal, whether they're getting into criminal activities, right? And all of this adds extra stress onto you as a parent as well. And that is why I love doing this podcast, to use the personal development strategies that I talk about to give you strategies for managing all of your mental, emotional, and physical capacity to recharge as frequently as possible, not overstep your capacity, and to prevent burnout. But secondly, to give you the tools for connecting and building trust with your teenager and young adult, so that you can support them through this process too. So while they are going through education and exams and career choices, dealing with peer pressure, teachers that they perhaps don't connect very well with, if they've got added neurodiversity and they're being pressured to drink or smoke, or actually started to, hanging around with the wrong friends, trying to get a job, learn to drive, maybe in and out of relationships, dealing with breakup. Then there's coming up to learning to vote, going to college and university. What else have we got? Maybe they are also dealing with health issues like poor diet and lots of junk food. Maybe they've got food allergies or something. It goes on and on. The list goes on and on. They are teenagers and young adults. They are young. They have their youth. But that doesn't exclude them from having a vast number of problems in their life. And then when you add on the mental overload, the emotional overload, and potentially the physical overload as well, we're bringing in the emotional depression, the burnout, and they are more than capable of burning out even through school. But they don't get the time of saying, I need a year and a half off sick. They are forced to still go back to school every single day and learn more and more and more, even though they're already feeling overwhelmed, depressed, and burned out. So how can we help them to lift their capacity to and recharge their capacity and to work within their ability, but not overload it? And so this might be things like being supportive in not overdoing external activities, but actually making sure that the time they spent doing homework is constructive rather than spending hours in the room not achieving it and never getting to the end. So it might be supporting them and not telling them as soon as they come from home from school, you have to go and do your homework before you have dinner or something, because that's not giving them a chance to recharge after school before going and starting again. So maybe that little bit of time between school and homework is actually really, really important to them not burning out, allowing their capacity to recharge a little, and then going and achieving homework in maybe one topic at a time rather than loading them with too much. Because sometimes teenagers get to that point, despite their high mental capacity, if their emotional capacity is restricted or the mental capacity is pushed, even though they've got a high capacity, if it's pushed too far by parents who think that their children really should be high achievers, but they're not feeling comfortable enough in saying it's too much. This is where we can very often hear stories about high achieving students suddenly go and taking their life. And this is not something we want to be working towards. So it's being aware of, are they working within their mental capacity, but not underachieving either? It's having a comfort zone somewhere in the middle, just enough of a comfort zone to keep them mentally and emotionally safe. Because otherwise, again, the other thing they can do is suddenly rebel. They decide that if they're not getting through the way they want, and they're not getting the happiness and the relaxation they want, they will go the opposite and rebel and go out and start drinking, smoking, doing drugs, hanging around with the wrong friends, joyriding cars, shoplifting. Or the other one is that anger will turn in on themselves. They get frustrated with themselves for not coping. And that's when it can become the self-harm. And then we've also got all the eating issues as well. There is so much to think about. And it all comes down to managing those mental and emotional capacities, along with the physical, with good diet, with good sleep, with good rest, right? So they need exercise to move and flow so that their system functions perfectly well. But they also need to rest it in between and give it a chance to recharge. They need to feed and nourish it properly, hydrate it properly, and rest it properly through good quality sleep. So again, any noises and distractions that are stopping them settling down or not having good sleep hygiene at the end of the day can all impact their physical ability. And then if their physical ability is getting drained, that automatically reduces the mental and emotional capacity as well. So they all kind of work together, mental, emotional, physical, and we need to keep all of them running smoothly. So I think, how can we look forward at managing this is the next topic. We've looked at having that capacity, that spare room, and a lot of the pitfalls that can happen if this goes wrong, right? We're looking at it from a point of view as a parent, managing yours because your family needs you, but also those teenagers and young adults coping with growing up. It is more stressful than we think. As adults, it's too easy to forget just how much they go through. Let's have a little bit of empathy for them, have some care for ourselves. And as adults, when we care for ourselves and we learn all the right strategies for coping, we pay that forward to them. We teach them this is how we really cope with life, not the way every generation in the past has coped with it and sorted out the previous one by saying, well, that was good enough for me, and you just got to get on with it and all of that. Right? We want to be able to teach them ways to really empower their learning through managing their energy resources on all levels. And spiritual is another way too, to bring into this. But I'm not going to go too much into that one today, except touching on some of the methodologies that can be used for recharging. So we've talked about recharging through food, water, and sleep, right? So, or rest. And sometimes that rest is just having a little bit of a break for music or TV, or just to go and sit in the garden or chill out in the room reading a book or a magazine or something. And for you as a parent, making sure you take time for your breaks and your lunch. So having time to stop and rest is key. When you rest your body physically, it is also a good chance to rest our minds, our mental capacity. And this is really important for people who are autistic spectrum and ADHD and other neurodiversities as well, because we have a much bigger capacity for overthinking. I know, on top of all of the things I mentioned that led to my burnout, I now know I have ADHD, which then I did not know, I was not aware of. But I was aware that my brain never stopped. When I used to say to my ex, oh, what are you thinking about? He's like, nothing. How can you sit and think about nothing? Well, I just stopped thinking. I'm like, but how? Oh, I'd never in my life understood what it's like to stop thinking. I still don't. But what I have learned to do is to stop thinking about certain things and bring my focus back to a center point through mindfulness. And this is what's been really powerful for me. Is mindfulness is when there's lots and lots of stuff going on, but I want to bring my thoughts purposefully to one thing or one set of experiences. And all of the things we've talked about, we experience all of that capacity and the energy that we use up through our 5 senses. And we can also recharge through those same 5 senses. So that's where it's things we hear, like music, or sitting having a calm, quiet chat with a friend or a family member, where we just banter away about nice things or have a casual conversation where we're not problem solving. And that's the important part of that. If it is in conversation, it's not problem solving. It's relaxed conversation. And then there is, so what we're saying, what we hear. So whether it is you like playing music as well, so that can bring in the physical aspect of actually playing while listening. It could also be watching, if you'd rather watch like YouTube videos with music and sing karaoke or whatever. Some people like to really get the aggressive energy out through karaoke, where others like to go back into the thoughtful processes through more gentle music, or even classical music used to be the big thing years ago, but not many people use classical music in quite the same way now to release all of that emotional overwhelm. But there is lots of other music on YouTube, which is what we call the new age music, where it's all the frequencies and the vibrations and the binaural beats are the modern day equivalent of what when I was younger we used as classical music. So that's all very, very valuable for using those auditory senses to come back to a place where you just focus on the music or the video and the music if you need the visual. Then we've got the visual itself. That could be anything we're looking at, like watching a candle burn, incense smoke, while you've also got the sense of smell coming in. Some people like to watch all the colours and the process of cooking, actually preparing food. Other people hate cooking. I'm not a kitchen person, but I appreciate that there is a tremendous amount of mindfulness in preparing and cooking food. For me, I'm more of a mindfulness while I'm eating person than I am a cooking person. But I get the concept there why a lot of people love it. And there's a lot of programs and videos, again, on YouTube where people do this ASMR cooking. And some people might not like actually cooking, but actually enjoy watching other people cook through ASMR videos. And I can't remember what the ASMR stands for. But yes, it basically triggers the senses through the hearing as well as watching on the screen. So lots of ways like this, and there's so many different things on YouTube that can actually give you that sensation of listen and watch and bring that sense of focus back to one place. But be careful not to go on too many of the little shorts videos with lots of dopamine hits, because if you start throwing in the stuff that gives you big dopamine hits and in quick drops, up drop, we actually start to lose and reduce that capacity for managing our dopamine, and then we're actually triggering more of a burnout. So go for the more long form videos and the things that are more relaxing and purposeful, while avoiding all the little shorts and the dopamine producing things that just give us quick hits and then leave us feeling very depleted afterwards. It's like a drug for the mind. So then we've got a sense of smell. So whether it is making a cup of coffee or drinking a herbal tea, whether it is cooking again, which again is a tremendous way of bringing sensory relaxation in through cooking or eating. And then there's also going out for walks in the woodlands and meadows and sitting by the river and down the garden with the flowers, using incense sticks and scented candles, baths and diffusers and essential oils. These are all amazing ways to use the sense of smell to tell your senses that right now is a safe space. This is nice, this is friendly, this is happy, and it's a time to relax and recharge. Because all of the things that trigger your senses in a positive way are recharging. And that is creating a balance against all of the other things that are going the other way and depleting your resources. And this is how we manage burnout, through things like the mindfulness in all forms, recentering and coming back to ourself, and then looking at what we're going to do in the world around us afterwards. But taking that little bit of time out is like a mini break for the mind. Then we've got a sense of touch. And again, lots of ways of doing this through prepping food. It could be through art. Creativity is amazing for sensory perception. And especially around teenagers, children like to either get hands really messy or go and digging down the garden. The gardening's another good one. Or whether they like to be cleaner using pens and felts. But the act of actually doing it is physical. So even if it's just holding a coloured pen, the act of actually drawing is physically using mindfulness to create lines. And either it is colouring or being creative, or then modelling with clay and plasticine, Play-Doh, all of that. It's all sensory and mindfulness where you focus on one thing. Now, if you're doing something like art and you've got a nice candle or incense stick burning and you've got music playing, right? So we've got auditory going on, we've got the visual going on with the art, we've got the sense of smell, we've got the touch going on. The only thing left that we haven't talked about much is the taste. And again, you could be chewing on some gum, you could be eating some sweets, not that I recommend a lot of sweets, sugar-free. It could be that you've brushed your teeth and you can taste the toothpaste, but being aware in that moment of as many of the senses that you are using as possible to recharge. And by using a lot of them together, right, by actually compounding the senses with mindfulness, it's like stacking them up for a more energetic recharge. And it might take a little bit longer for this, as opposed to those few moments of looking out the window at the pretty flowers in the garden versus sitting there for an hour or two doing some artwork with candles burning, music playing, and a nice cup of coffee there with you as well, where you sip in on that. That's the way of really building up a big recharge on a weekend or of an evening. But make sure you blend them. And during the day-to-day commute or getting ready for school and children getting ready in the morning, just using even 10 seconds of mindfulness for any activity you are doing is a bonus. It all helps. Now, I'm not going to go into it too much more there, but there are more ways which we can use mindfulness. And I actually have a course on my website that is called 10 Steps to Beginning Mindfulness. And it really does take you through a 10-step process for understanding how it helps you, whether it is working with family. And I'm not going into it for the Parenting Teens podcast, but if you've got younger family that are actually at home with you when you're trying to work at home and you're finding it difficult to find calm and peace, there are strategies in there for that. If you're somebody who's on a daily commute on the tube trains or on the buses or on the motorway, there are ways to bring mindfulness into your commute. How to use mindfulness at home, doing all of the household chores, through to managing to stay calm in an office all day, surrounded by a massive workload. My 10 Steps to Beginning Mindfulness course covers it all, and it's just £15. So I'd highly recommend checking that out on my website, and I'll put the link in the description below. So all of that is a great topic today for recognizing what burnout is. It is the difference between your capacity and what you're actually doing in a day, and whether or not you're overloading your capacity or leaving room for some freedom in your schedule and workload and the things that are going on in your life. So how you can manage that through circles of influence and control, whether it is just go back through previous episodes, or if it's down to managing some of those things, check out my High Leverage Actions podcast on the Self-Help Bookshelf that I do on Mondays with Rory Lemon, because there are a lot of personal development strategies we talk about on that podcast that complement parenting on this podcast, that as parents, we can use those to create a higher level version of ourselves to support our teenagers and young adults. These two podcasts go hand in hand, I guarantee it. And we did actually talk about burnout on Monday this week on that channel, but in a slightly different context in adult form. But today I really want to bring in the importance of how that pays forward. The ripple effect is another good one to watch over there and on here, this channel. The ripple effect in how, as adults, if we do not manage our energy, emotional, physical, mental reserves, and we don't manage them effectively, how the ripple effect of that pays forward to our family and to our colleagues and to our partners and our friends. So check out the ripple effect as well. There is so much, honestly, that I could cover with you. I sometimes don't know where to stop on a single episode because it all interlinks and it all threads, and it's like one big web of life. But I'm trying to break this down into individual topics for you to help you understand how many different aspects of personal development affect our daily lives and can actually give us the power back to create the life we want. So certainly for today, recognizing what burnout is, how to recognize it through the irritability and the emotions when people are starting to feel stressed and drained, the signs that we saw in teenagers that we talked about earlier, recognizing those in yourself as well, right? And then how to recover through using all of the senses. Now, there are lots of ways to recover and recuperate. There are lots of ways, whether it is going on a retreat, going for a massage, going swimming, and in a steam room and sauna, going for a walk on the beach. There are many, many ways to recover. But whichever way you choose, that being mindful about it and doing it with purpose for recharging is the part that matters. Even if it's having a barbecue with the family in the garden in the summer, having time to sit down with family and a drink and a burger and whatever you have is all part of the process of being mindful, rather than being stressed about everybody coming, what I'm going to cook, how I'm going to clear up, is there enough chairs? Enjoy the process and work together interdependently as a family. And there's another topic, interdependence, that I want to bring in. This is a key one. If I haven't already covered it, I lose the plot of what I've already done some days. So I'm going to end there for today, as I hope that's given you some insight into managing burnout as a parent, but also supporting your teenagers and young adults through their burnout and encouraging them to use these practices too. And when you work together on it, and perhaps do sit and do those creative activities together, listen to music together, go for walks together, instead of it being your burnout, their burnout, and this big clash, or either a clash or a pull apart going on between you when nothing aligns, when we start to use strategies to overcome burnout, you can actually do them side by side. You can work together, and that builds bonds, it builds trust, and it builds families back together again. So don't forget to check out the course on the website. And if you really are dealing a lot with the emotional overwhelm and depression with a teenager, don't forget to check out my book, Brain Unchained, as well. But that's all information for all of that is on my website in the link. So thank you very much. I still haven't decided what I'm going to talk about next week, but I will let you know if I decide by the time I start sharing this on social media. But in the meantime, hugs and healing from me. Thank you so much to everybody for keep sharing, liking, and joining in on this podcast, because it's all relevant to getting those algorithms to be friendly towards me so they can be out there and help everybody else. It's all amazing. And I will see you again for another episode of the Parenting Teens podcast next Tuesday. I am a day late this week, but it will be back on Tuesday next week. Hugs and healing for now. Bye-bye.